Welcome to the Knowledge Stack podcast. My name's Jason. Thank you for joining me. Today's episode was recorded a few weeks ago, and I'm just now getting around to editing and posting. I sat down with Ryan McEleney, the Chief People and Culture Officer for American Eagle Financial Credit Union in Connecticut. I reached out to Ryan because I wanted to have a conversation about DEI in general. It's certainly an area outside my wheelhouse. I'm a Chief Information Officer. I met Ryan at the Credit Union Growth and Innovation Summit earlier this year. And we chatted for a little bit, and I thought he'd be a good person to talk to. Ryan's also very tech savvy, certainly for an HR person or a human resources related person. And we had a great conversation about the intersection of technology and where technology can be applied to human resources, to human capital management, to, understanding opportunities for coaching and leveraging things like large language models to do so. So it was a great conversation on the podcast, and before and after and since. So this is a episode that I think probably could have run another 30 to 60 minutes, but I'm sure we're going to continue this conversation with Ryan because we actually didn't get too deep into the DEI stuff. But it was an excellent conversation. I'm very interested in continuing that conversation. So this is the Knowledge Stack podcast, and the idea is to kind of stack knowledge, to learn, to grow. Having conversations with folks like Ryan are why I'm doing this podcast. I don't know everything, and there are much smarter people about a lot of different topics out there, and I want to have those conversations. So this is a great conversation about a subject I know very, very little about. And I'm certainly interested and open to having the same conversations about other topics with other experts. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Ryan. We are going to do a little bit more on this topic, so stay tuned for that. And without further ado, here's Ryan McEleney from the American Eagle Financial Credit Union, having a great conversation about DEI and human capital. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe. And if you'd like any additional information, please comment, reach out, visit the website, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks. Bye-bye. I'm here with Ryan McEleney from American Eagle Financial Credit Union. I met Ryan at the Credit Union Summit a couple of months ago, and I recognize in my my executive toolkit that I'm a little weak in the DEI and generally human resources area, and I know that's a strength for Ryan. So I asked him to hop on the podcast so that we can have a conversation about the program that American Eagle has, and just talk a little bit about some of these diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Ryan, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. Tell me a little bit about your background. Let's start there.
Yeah, happy to. So I don't think as HR, quote unquote HR people, I'm supposed to say this because we're supposed to be all about deliberate career pathing and all that fun stuff. But I have a totally accidental career in banking and in HR. So as a teenager, I didn't have the opportunity to go away to 4-year college. I was kind of working my way through community college, working multiple jobs. And one of those ended up being a part-time teller job at a big regional bank out here that was growing at the time. And part-time teller turned into full-time teller, turned into float, platform assistant manager. And then it just so happened that one of the branches that I was working in had a satellite training office upstairs. So the training manager said, "Hey, I see your name on the sales scoreboards and we have a sales segment. Can you come up here and do some training for me?" And then that led into a training job, and that was my foray into HR. So from there, really took an interest in how to sort of turn the light bulb on for people around some of the things that I had been doing every day in my job, and was asked to then build some of the sales and service model back in the retail area of the organization, and did some of the coaching, leadership training, and non-HR kind of more business focused learning. Then spent some time. We went through a major reculturization, I would call it. I think I made that word up, but we'll use it. Where at the time the bank I was at was going through a major change, so we partnered with the Disney Institute and sent a bunch of leaders down there to take part in some of their programs, and then built a really deliberate culture program that included a reorientation for everyone at the bank. Took people off the line, did road shows, rebuilt the recognition program. I led a team of high potential senior leaders at maybe the second or third level of the organization that had business unit ownership of some of our engagement strategy. A lot of really hands-on work there, which was really cool and a great learning experience.
What did you think of the Disney program?
I think it was worthwhile. I wasn't paying for it, so that makes it worthwhile. But I would say sort of the wisdom is there. I learned a lot from it. I would say just like Disney sort of moniker, like a lot of it's show, right? Like it's some of it's basic lessons dressed up, but it did a lot for us. It was effective, and sometimes that show gets people's attention. So yeah, I wouldn't say it would be the first thing I would rush to, but I think it was a worthwhile investment.
The other thing I picked up on is the group that participated wasn't your top level, your senior level. It was sort of a second level. Was that a deliberate decision?
Yeah, actually, the senior level went down to Disney as well. But when we started to then build an action plan out of that, that's where we tapped into that next level for a couple of reasons. That was deliberate. We needed people who could lead, but also have their sleeves rolled up. And we also wanted to pull together that next level from a development perspective. This is stuff that wasn't core job, that they could work across the organization with people they didn't work as closely with, and we're sort of bringing those leaders up, knowing how important culture is before they get to those senior most posts. So there were SVPs and VPs, but not the EVP level. This is a larger institution. So
sure.
Yeah, from there, there was a particular executive who was doing a lot of good things for us on the balance sheet side, but was from a much bigger international bank and was sort of a misfit culture-wise. And so one day, the HR leader at the time, the CHRO, said, "Hey, you're doing great with this culture stuff. Can we just like focus it here? Can you be the HR support for this executive and a couple others?" So that was my next role, and learned a ton because I got to see the organization through the eyes of a CFO, a CMO, chief lending officer. So really got to soak up a lot through that, and then ended up somehow in a conference room, the war rooms that you see on TV shows with the old brown banana and the flip charts with, major investment that we made as a bank in creating some incentive plans that were really supposed to be the answer to closing a bunch of branches, that if we can use profitability analysis and align value to incentive and raise the sales platform, then we can keep these branches open, and made some commitments to the street. And unfortunately, my HR colleague who wasn't doing that was failing to bring the team together. And so the CFO, who I thought liked me, said, "Hey, I need you to get into that war room and help fix that." And so then I spent
throwing you right into the fire.
Yeah. I thought we were cool, but I guess not. It was like a week before Christmas, and he used to call me the monk. He goes, "Hey, monk, this is going live. Like, we have a pilot happening soon, and I need you to cancel whatever you got for the rest of the year and get into that war room." So that was my Christmas present. But it ended up being a really good experience, where I got really closer to systems, process, data, picked up some Six Sigma tools along the way as at other stages of my career, but getting into source data and trying to map all that together, and sitting next to a financial analyst as well as an IT analyst in that environment, building something that way was awesome.
So did it work?
It did. We got double the lift that we had promised the street. We turned it around.
There you go.
Unfortunately, it worked so well that then they gave me 39 other incentive plans for the team to work on, and everything from the commercial plans to lending and all that. But this was right after Wells Fargo and all that fun with sales integrity. So it was strategically important, and compliance-wise was front and center.
Sure.
But again, good experience, and spent a couple of years doing that. And then in the course of it, with some of the things I learned along the way, I'd always been, since working with the CMO, and at the time, big data was really a big theme in advertising and marketing. And
Sure.
I was always of the mind that us HR people are a little slow to the party, that, usually we invest on the front end and the revenue side, and the same concepts happen. We're dealing with people outside and people inside. So there's so much potential for data and managing and shaping cultures and environments, and it's not just member experience, but team member experience. And so
Sure.
having a background with data now and sewing that together with understanding systems, and I became really excited about building a people analytics function when that wasn't really much of a thing in organizations of our scale. We were about 3,000 employees at the time. So I did that. I ended up taking all the HR technology, analytics, HR technology operations. And then I had some analysts that I developed through the incentive program, and we built something unique and new there, and did that for a while, and then helped with building an enterprise analytics when we went through a merger of equals a few years ago. And I was asked to lead when the organization when the merger was being announced, to lead the leadership and performance analytics function. And that was when I said, hey, like, where is that? How far am I going to be driving? Am I still going to see my kids, or am I going to be driving to New York every day? And what's my other option? And I surprised everyone and myself and said, you know what? I don't think this is the way I want to go with my career. And on the same time, I got a call from American Eagle, and here I am today. That was about 3.5 years ago.
Wow. That's
So
a pretty good story.
Very unintentional career path.
So what was the change like coming from, a fairly large, commercial bank to, a credit union in general?
Yeah, it was a lot, in a good and bad and neutral way, I guess. The good, a lot of the organization I was with was phenomenal. I learned a lot and grew a lot, but inevitably, when you're in a public organization, your mission is always going to be there's going to be some bleed, right? You're as interested in the perception of doing good work as actually doing it, because you have to be when people are looking in. Shareholders are demanding a return, and I found the more senior I got, the more that had to be top of mind. And it was just a nice breath of fresh air to walk into a room as part of an executive team, and we had the same message with the door closed as the door open, as going outside and talking to the members. So that was phenomenal. And you can feel the care. Like, I think the credit union movement attracts people with big hearts that genuinely want to make a difference. And that's a great place to start, especially in roles like mine. I think
how did the organizations compare in size?
It's about
Similar?
a tenth of what I was used to. Yeah. So American Eagle, we have 360 right now.
All right. So
on the other side, in a smaller shop, there's some drawbacks, right? Like a lot of what can be done on the side of desks and manually doesn't scale, and so having to adapt and figure out what should be built for scale, what can be preserved, and helping. You never want to be the new person to come in and say this, that, and the other thing. And frankly, my biggest learning was I had a list, Jason. Like, I remember the first month, I just did a list of all the things I saw that I thought were opportunities. And I still look at that list from the first month, because you can't, even if you had the capacity to do all the things, like, people aren't ready for all the things. Like, some of it doesn't fit the environment. Some of it, the timing isn't right. Some of it, so.
What did you prioritize? What made the top of your list? Without divulging anything that, you shouldn't.
Yeah, I think culture becomes the foundation that everything else is built upon. So even if there's like a systems change or a process change, there's the word change in there, right? So first, culture helps people be open to change. And so there was pieces in every bucket, but the things that we're going to scale in terms of mindset, I think have been the priority for us.
Interesting. Would you say that you brought the culture to American Eagle, or was it there, you just maybe groomed it or fine-tuned it a little bit?
Yeah, we definitely have had a lot of change. I wouldn't take culture's a collective
Sure.
exercise, but my cheesy analogy for that is like the orchestra analogy.
Mhm.
I might be one of the conductors of that, but every
Mhm.
instrument needs to be playing, and everyone owns it.
Mhm.
It's a collective effort.
Sure.
But we were very deliberate, and still are very deliberate.
And how long? When did you start at American Eagle?
Be 4 years ago in August.
Okay. So, when we were talking about doing the episode, obviously I do a little bit of research, and, I did some investigating, and American Eagle's pretty well liked in the community. Your employees seem to also, you've got outstanding, Glassdoor reviews, and, there's not a lot of negative stuff that I see out there. And, you take that for what it's worth. People are going to complain. It happens. There's always negative comments and things like that. There's not very many. When I looked, you had one opening, which is insane for a $1 billion or $2 billion credit union. You had one job opening on your website, which was, phenomenal. Is your turnover ridiculously low?
I think we've managed it. It's
Yeah.
lower than average. It's not ridiculously low, and we have 3 openings, I believe, today. Just for
Oh
the
my
record,
God.
one of them's an ad on my team, so
Oh, okay. Well, we won't count that one.
I'm
So
padding,
maybe
I'm padding our
double
numbers.
it.
But yeah, I think our turnover tends to be lower than average. It hasn't always been that way, and it is a
Mm,
key indicator, as you mentioned, but not the indicator. And there
sure.
should be some healthy churn, but a lot of that
Mm,
is doing. It's as much of the relationship with direct manager as much as anything
mm,
we're doing from the center. I think
mm,
it's being what we say we are. Like, there's a lot of effort to build a talent brand, but if that talent brand isn't the experience, all you do is create turnover.
sure.
A lot of that is we have a great team of folks, including Deirdre. Shout out to Deirdre, who's filling those recs and helping the business find the right people so that the
Mm,
numbers stay down. She's got her process refined, and some of that might
mm,
also be that there's evergreen, like recs in the call center, for example, that we might have one posting, but we might have 4 openings behind it.
mm. Interesting. What do you attribute that to? What do you think, is keeping people happy at American Eagle?
Well, for everybody's different, and it's going to
Hmm.
be something we have to monitor, and that's the thing I'm
How do you
passionate.
monitor it?
Yeah, very intentionally. So we have a very robust team member experience process, which is something I could geek out on for the rest of this episode. You probably don't want me to, but one of the things I'm really passionate about is how you measure experience. There's qualitative and quantitative, and HR folks are sort of known for just throwing out random stats and feeling things out.
Surveys.
But there's a way to
Mhm,
make human experience also very quantitative, and so we
mhm,
use a pulse survey strategy that's really deliberately designed. We have indices that we've created, like psychological safety is something that we talk a lot about as a indicator of the climate that we're trying to create as we're
mhm,
trying to be more innovative. As an example, it's a proven way to measure and understand culture. We have a deliberate index on our leadership practices that we're not only how do you feel, but are people doing the things around you that we value, so that if there's pockets of the organization that's not happening, then we can get them the tools to make sure that they do. As another example, you talked about DEIB, we have an index just to measure that, and then obviously overall engagement and every other element of the environment. But that ends up being more of a macro, and we can drill down. We have a lot of cool ways to do that. We've
mhm,
created derived fields, for example, that we use a vendor that gives us some space, so it ensures anonymity, so people know that we don't know what people are saying. Even
mhm.
if you use like a Survey Monkey, there's an IP address tag, and so
Sure.
people are rightly paranoid about saying things
Mhm.
that they really feel.
Yep.
And when we started doing that, actually, we had like the best place. When I started, there was the best place to work, flag on the website and all that. And we deliberately
Right.
paused on that, the outside marketing part, and we took that
Mhm.
funding and said, let's find a software partner to separate us from the data and we spent the first few months saying, like, I even have videos saying, this is how the system works. I literally can't find out who said what unless you put your name in the comments.
Mhm.
And suddenly our engagement score went, whoop, and we were like excited about it because now we knew,
Right.
like, we're working from the place of truth instead of what people think we want them to say.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get that macro analysis, and again, there's some of those derived fields tell us things like we'll take stuff out of ADP and create a field that we turn over to the vendor when we send the file, and it will say like, hey, reports X generation reporting to Y generation. So we can be able to cut the data and say, hey, you know what? We do have 5 generations in the workplace, and people that are Gen Z reporting to boomers, like their communication
Mm-hmm.
score is 40% positive. What are we going to do to help create,
Interesting.
things like, so there's some really targeted things like
Mm-hmm.
that. But then a lot of it also happens in individual, right? So we have to help people understand. Initially, that was like, oh, this survey thing is great. There's all this action coming out of it. We have a whole robust continuous improvement loop built into it.
Mm-hmm.
This is the way that I can be heard, right? So then I would walk past someone and they'd be like, hey, I said in the survey I want this specific thing to happen, and it didn't happen. And we're like, I have
Mm-hmm.
to back it up and say, all right, here's the channel for specific one-to-one interaction type
Right.
of. Here's
Yeah.
where your manager plays a role. Here's where
Mm-hmm.
your network plays a role. Here's where the organization plays a role. And we've been really delivered. We're not all the way there. We haven't arrived, but we have an 85% favorable engagement coming off the 60s when we started it, and it's just a constant. That's the work that's never done. It's just a continuous talk back, both on the survey side and on the individual side, as you know.
It's interesting that you peel back even just the generational differences between direct reports and managers, and evaluate the effectiveness of their communication. Everyone, all organizations, just about all of them, do a Myers-Briggs or a taking flight or something, so personality trait identification, just so that you're speaking the same language, you know how to talk to other people. But I never thought about using the sort of generational segmentation as another data element, because that's huge. They communicate differently, they talk differently, they respond to feedback differently. And you kind of have to treat a millennial reporting to a boomer way different than a Gen X and Gen Y working together, sort of thing. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's so much opportunity there. You mentioned like the Myers-Briggs. I think we're not too far away. And one of the reasons I love talking to you when we were out at that conference is I think so much is converging with people and technology that opens so many doors and possibilities. But I think one of those in the very near future will really transform the way we do what I'm talking about, which is you can take things like style assessments and preference data, pull that into a model that also includes experience and sentiment capture, also includes digital exhaust from using common apps, and also, you can put all these different data sources together. You can also then train the model on outcomes. So for example, if I said, hey, Jason just started here 6 months ago, I have that data coming out of ADP. I also know that his style, he's a connector, and he thrives on human interaction that gives him energy. I see some of his sentiment is waning a little bit. I also know from history that he's probably not talking to the people at his old company anymore. He's lost those connections. He might be struggling to form new ones. I also see in his development plan, he's trying to be better at data analysis. Well, hey, now I have this mentor data that says, hey, there's George or Cindy over here who's really good at data analysis, is in a mentor program. And by the way, she's free on Fridays at 3, where Jason's also 3. Hey, manager, here's a nudge. Why don't you set up Jason 99% of the time? This kind of connection increases engagement. So we've already got an appointment generated for Cindy's calendar. Would you like us to send the intro package to Jason about why mentoring is important? And
that's
boom,
great.
It's done, right?
Yep.
And then I don't have a job, and some of my colleagues don't.
And I don't have a job. I train the model and I leave. You set it up and you leave.
Right.
But I mean, you're spot on. I mean, that's the use of these models, is take all of this seemingly disparate data and just connect it. You're just making connections. You're looking at a true picture of all of these inputs and making decisions about psychological health and well-being and, contentness and career pathing and all that sort of stuff, just it's in a box. You give it the right input, you give it, you train it properly, and it's infinitely repeatable. Humans are pretty predictable. There's an input, there's an output. Everyone acts a little bit differently, but if you've got enough input, I think you can, disintermediate some of those weird, anomalies that might pop up with two different personality styles. So that's pretty interesting.
And that's where you got humans being human to solve for those anomalies. Like, you get to point the human at the uniquely human part of the equation, which is what I think people sometimes are missing with all of this is, all jokes aside about losing jobs, like if we weren't afraid and we looked at, hey, in the broader evolution of society, is this something we need or want? I think in a vacuum, people would say, yes, we want to free up people to be human and not ones and zeros, extensions of machines, industrial era output type of beings. And we need a catch up, right? Like the explosion of data access and knowledge sharing and information that explosion is causing a ton of stress. We aren't wired to handle it, that volume. And this is the answer. Like, this is the correction, right? If that can be connected, streamlined, and presented in ways that are easily consumable and allow people to be people, then it creates a whole different dynamic that I think transforms not only the workplace, but our world.
Well, that use case that you just gave, if you didn't have the technology, if you didn't have a model that would help you do that, you're putting that burden on the manager and their ongoing coaching activities. And, how do they even get some of that data? That's an interesting question too. How do you avoid the creepiness of, sort of stalking, employees' emails and their team activity and looking at their app usage on their phones, which is all, fair game. Everybody, when they get their corporate device, they're signing their life away and they sign their acceptable use, and there's there's limited expectation of privacy with that kind of stuff. But how do you kind of broach that, you're always snooping on me, and, how do you get some of these employees to recognize that the value is in, the output, and we're trying to help with all of these, these positive things that come along with something that's a little creepy, a little big brother.
The creepy factor is real. And I think the last thing we want to do is ever butt up against that. We're not at this place yet,
right?
By the way, but generally speaking, I think a couple of thoughts there. One is the creepy line is in different places for everybody. So you have to kind of find the general line of creepiness that will suit your procedures, and you have to be really clear in disclosing what you are and aren't using. Like, people just want to know. And we've talked about this, you and I, in the past, that there's a different expectation. And my bad analogy for that is, like, to me, data is a modern language, and insights are sort of modern thinking, right? Like, you're connecting data to create an insight. Like, with people having a digital footprint now, particularly generations that are more used to growing up in that environment, some of the things that we've, as an old, barely millennial, I find creepy. People have an expectation around, like, hey, if I already put my data in here, why are you asking me again? It's the same as being in a conversation and you tell somebody something and then they forget 6 minutes later. So some people are a little more, open, and frankly, I think the world will be more open to that with some more broad safeguards around that. But that said, I think generally what I try to do is be targeted on the macro level, but don't have access at the micro level. So that's why we aggregate responses on the surveys. The system's set up that if there's not 5, we just don't get a data line, and it'll also suppress the next data line, so we can't back into what was said by a particular person or group. And even if I'm configuring, like, digital exhaust platforms, I would want to be reporting on, for example, finance. How often what are the ebbs and flows of keystroke volume in finance around a monthly close or something like that? I'm not going to say what is Debbie's, and I don't want to have access to Debbie's data because I don't want Debbie to think I care about the thing that I don't care about. So
some level of anonymization that makes it still useful, but not maybe identifiable. A accounting, one bookkeeper, something like that is, uh, you're gathering enough data to know that a person in this position, in this role, during this time of the month is expected to do X. And if you see Y, then that's an anomaly. And then you can take whatever action based on that anomaly. It'd be interesting to see how effective it would be to tie in things like additional coaching opportunities or mentorships, or maybe job change suggestions and stuff like that to a specific individual. Again, kind of a gray area thing, and maybe that's an opt-in opportunity where if you've got one of these typically younger digital natives who are interested in those sorts of things and see that as a possible career path opportunity, where we can make recommendations to them based on all of our experience, based on the model's experience about potential job positions that may be available for them and that might fit their work style and personality and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I agree. I think your gray area is shades of gray for a whole lot of different people and in a whole lot of different areas. So that's that's the future. I love this model stuff. This is good stuff. We haven't even talked about DEI yet. So let's talk about DEI. How did the DEI program at American Eagle get started? Is that something that you started with them, or did they have a DEI program before you got there?
So we had a wonderful organically built DEI council of team members that was just built by them. And a lot of that was around celebration and awareness. When I started is when we were more deliberately building structure around DEIB. And so one of the first positions that came along with me was our first inclusion leader. And it took us quite a while to find the right person there. So I built the first round of strategy that we partnered with the board to make sure everybody was on the same page with how we were going to start taking steps forward. And then every year we go through a process of analysis of, did we do what we said we were going to do? What were the results? How do we pivot on that strategy, just like any other strategic framework?
So you refer to DEIB. I've heard DEIA. I've heard just plain DEI. I'm assuming the B is belonging. The A, I think, is acceptance. Define what your DEIB program is.
Yeah, first let's acknowledge that we're going to get really deep on DEIB as a couple of middle-aged white heterosexual, and so let's solve all the
There's not a lot of diversity and equity in this conversation.
Well, and we're all people, so right, we all have uniqueness. Yep. But I think the language is my own opinion, and frankly, when I posted that position, it was VP of inclusion, because there's different ways that people use these words distinctly, and the words matter obviously, but I like to think of inclusion as a broader term that encapsulates all the other that you mentioned, because if you're going to be inclusive, that's a diverse, you need to have representation, right? If you're going to be inclusive, equity is implied in there. To me, belonging and inclusion are both the sort of less measurable side that are part and parcel to each other. So I like that word particularly, but I think a lot of it is translating it to what other people used to. We're less focused on the acronym and more on the heart of what we're trying to do. And for us, that's look, we want to represent our goal. We have two goals. One is that we want to make sure that our team at all levels represents the community that we serve in terms of demographics. That's important, because then we're picking up perspectives in line with what our membership consists of. And then the second is that we have equity in the field of the experience of people inside, so that we know that we are fully cultivating that potential that we're bringing to the table. So we're not just bringing people to the table, but they're fully participating. And so we have a goal that reports out what are how much variation is there in experience amongst all the demographics that we focus on as well.
What kind of demographics do you focus on? At the top, you've got your race, gender, ethnicity, all of those sorts of things. is that it, or do you look a little bit deeper? Do you compare department to department? Do you compare basically against your field of membership against the organization as a whole? How do you kind of carve that up?
Yeah, so just on the base reporting, we use census data because it's available to look at our community that we serve and then compare that internally on the diversity side. And we do use the demographics that you touched on because those are what are reported.
Right.
But we also are very clear on, we have our own diversity wheel, which takes you from an visible demographics, things like, or easily identifiable demographics, all the way to, the outer layers of that, and want to be really clear that all of those are a priority for us in inclusion in broad strokes.
Sure.
But what we're going to start at is the middle, right? Like all that will come and has to be cultivated, but we know the numbers. We're not in a place of trust where we're going to go out and say, for example, to our team, and we might get there, but what is your sexual orientation? Can you tell us? Because we want to make sure we have representation. That's a different.
I feel like HR might yell at me if I start doing that in interviews.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to go too well.
No, I don't think so.
So we try to build the program around full inclusion, but we're centering the reporting on it. As we talk about, like, if we get this part right and we're worried about are we getting the numbers in the other, I can't wait till we're at that place.
Right. Yep. So how do you navigate those landmines? Like, the sexual orientation thing. Like, obviously that's not going to be a question on your application. I wouldn't imagine. But how do you kind of walk that line? Like, you want to be open and have those open conversations and make sure that, the person interviewing you across the table feels, included and feel like they belong in this environment. Is this a more formalized extension of just being mindful and being, a good human being, or is it something more?
Yeah. So I think if you're getting at how do we, without knowing all those things, how do we achieve what we're setting out to achieve? And I think one of the principles of that is you got to just, if you create the space holistically and generally, people will step forward with their true self, and that will attract and build. You don't have to know all those data points. So, for example, we put together, we're very deliberate on what type of resources group we want to put together, but we call them one team resource groups. One of those is our Pride resource group, and we're talking about sexual orientation.
Sure.
People that's an important part of their identity, step forward and said, because we've created a general sense of safety and we have that organic counsel to build from. Hey, I want to lead this. And then people who want to step forward. The voice of those individuals informs what we're doing organizationally. That's part of why they're there. They're part affinity groups, part business resource groups. Right? It's people. There's a place where I can engage with people with like experience and identity. And that's a voice that I don't have as well represented at the senior leadership table as we want to. So here's a direct pathway to make sure your experience is represented. So, and informing our choices. So I think generally speaking, when we talk about being really deliberate about certain demographics in our data, creating a culture of belonging starts with vulnerability and openness, no matter what your identities are. I'm as important to saying we just had, for example, Mental Health Awareness Month. We had a focus day yesterday. One of the things I was really deliberate and our team was deliberate about is there's so much stigma with mental health that people aren't going to step forward generally because of that stigma. Plus, you're in a financial institute, you're in your workplace, a financial institute. Like, there's all these reasons why people will hide their challenges, and there's no more important challenge in the world than what's going on between your ears. And so we, I was on a fireside chat yesterday with one of our OTRG leaders. They do these firesides regularly, and really the point is being vulnerable. What's my experience? This is what mental health looks like, even in times of mental health, of calm and well. I'm still seeing a therapist because I think it's like going to the gym. You don't stop going just because you lost some of that belly fat. And I want to be the best optimal human being I can be, and that requires work on every front and helping people know it's not a problem. It's part of the solution. And the more we've seen that people are doing that. And we have other executives next to me talking about her experience. And suddenly you see the chats blowing up with, oh my gosh, I can relate to that. And people start to feel seen. And then it doesn't, again, that climate is not unique to any particular identity. And none of us are particularly overlapping. We all have uniqueness, and that's what starts to flourish over time.
So how do you get, I'm curious if the bank that you were at previously, did they have a similar program, or do you know if they currently have a similar program? You know, traditionally, banks and even credit unions, financial institutions in general, have tended to be a lot more conservative. You know, today's generations are absolutely not. So I'm curious if you've had any, you know, longtime members, longtime customers of the banks or credit unions. Have you had a lot of pushback from them? Maybe some of the more senior board members, things like that. How has that been with American Eagle, and if you know from the bank in general?
Yeah, maybe I'll focus it more on American Eagle and our experience there. We did have a DEI program that was being built at my former employer, and I think it was a little more corporate-y, but valuable. Not everybody is on board now, from our team members to our members, and I think that's okay. And I think I'd like to be really direct in that conversation to say that there's compassion all the way around. Like, let's take the ends of the spectrum away and just throw it. Like, if you're somebody who is filled with hate, I have some compassion for how that became, but I'm not going to focus on you. You don't have a part of this discussion, right? That's a whole nother type of discussion.
Yep.
I would also say that to be balanced, there's people on the other end of the spectrum that use diversity in the same way that the systems that are trying to break down, they're just trying to build for themselves, right? It's for power, it's for self-promotion, it's for people like me. And I get to, if I'm a minority in some sense, then I can leverage this to make my vote rise, and I don't really care about the rest. That's no different than this end of the spectrum. Although obviously it's a little more, I can have more compassion when you've had that denied you and people like you over time. And I'm sitting in a place of privilege to be able to make that judgment, right?
Yep.
But in between there, I think there's some real challenges happening. And I think people who have a depth of understanding about diversity and are open to it appreciate the value on all different levels. It's not just the right thing to do for humanity. It's strategically important. And I would also like that when I say strategically important, we can have a whole podcast on like, what does organizational science say? Like, now we can correlate conditions to outcomes, and literally it's one of the core half dozen environmental conditions for a successful organization is that there's diversity and inclusion. It's a core to innovation that we're having all perspectives present at the table. Think about you're an IT guy. There's a model. If you only have certain data to train the model, it's not going to be as an effective a model, especially when you're rolling it out in an environment where all those conditions exist. Like, it's that simple. And then we're also serving an a membership that is diverse. So like strategically that's there. But I'd also like remind people that we're a cooperative, and that's part of our cooperative principles. It's part of the credit union principles. Like, it's not a debate that this is, if diversity isn't something you value, you're probably just not in the right place. But that said, there's room at the table. Like, you don't want to scare away the opinion, especially in a sensitive area where you got to meet people where they are. And some people are in a place that may be closer to this end of the spectrum where there's fear and how's this going to affect me? What's it going to take away from me? And that has to be addressed. But there's frankly a lot of bad DEI out there too. And that's causing more of the good to look like the bad. So, for every really well-designed process enhancement that creates less bias in the system, there's somebody who's setting a quota and telling you that's the way to do it. And everybody on the other side of the spectrum has right to say, this doesn't work.
Yep.
I'd also say,
I was just thinking the exact same thing. The quote you said, quota, that was it popped in my head. You hear about, police officers, have quotas for tickets, and that's the way they maintain law and order and make sure people don't speed. But, that's not effective. It's just you're coaching to a number and you're trying to get to a number. You're not improving the situation. You're not improving anybody's lives. It's just you've got a number. You got to get that number. As long as that number matches, we don't care, what the breakage is anywhere. It's all about the number.
yeah.
So
Some of it's that simple that like you absolutely need to build a process that ensures you have the right representation in your candidate pool and that you've prevented as much human bias from the selection process as possible. If you're saying I'm going into this looking for this person with this demographic, you're by definition not creating an equitable process. It's the same issue. So a lot of that bad DEI exists, and I would also say because the field has emerged so quickly, there's there was this vortex to pull people into, a lot of passionate people that weren't really good at it, and they got a big platform, and not a lot of people willing to knock them off that platform because it wasn't politically conducive to that. And the hard part of that is there's so much important work that has to be done well that one can easily be confused for the other, and the people who are doing it bad are fueling the people who don't think it's important and the fear that lives over on that other side.
So how do you handle things like coming from a more conservative, probably region too? I would imagine DEI initiatives are going to be different region by region. We're in the South somewhat. It's probably worse a little further south. But I'm curious if there is some regionalization in, you're in the Northeast, and, it's I would say it's probably a bit more liberal than it is around here. Although, maybe not. Is there regionalization in some of these DEI initiatives?
Yeah, so we operate in Connecticut and in one county in Western Mass, so we don't have as much of a regional question to answer. But obviously, I think you got to take your local conditions into account in the delivery mechanism and the way you connect. The core substance has to be the same, maybe even the pace of making those connections. But I would say even Connecticut, we have a very split state politically. And when there's team members here who have either misconceptions or concerns. We've had members who say, look, you're at a pride parade and that's not my credit union. We say, okay, well, hope you find your own credit union.
Right.
But this is a place where we value everybody for who they are. And so
have you had a lot of that?
I wouldn't say, I think less than people feared. I think that's usually something that holds people back. Well, half of our long-term members aren't going to like this and they're going to leave. No, a handful are going to call the call center, and you're going to use those handful as a way to be paralyzed to move forward. And in reality, when we have our OTRGs have a budget for community, for example, and they're bringing in community organizations to talk to our team. And the beautiful thing about the credit union movement is that big heart that I talked about in the beginning of our conversation. And the solution is cut out the political stuff, cut out all of the misconception, give your team opportunities to see people. And that heart takes over. When you can hear me talking about this and that and bias control and how it's important to your brain, forget diversity. Like this is wiring your brain for maximum efficiency, and read thinking fast and thinking slow and system 1 and system 2 and how important that is.
Yeah, there you go.
I can go through all that, and that can engage anybody. You can do that. Then there's a very gut punch heart where we have a team member who's sitting in front of a group of people in a forum that we've created and is optional to attend, and comes out for the first time as transgendered, and her hands are shaking. And she said, I've never felt safe in an environment to do this. And my family disowned me for 5 years before I worked here.
Well, that's a crazy story, because they're at work. They're at their place of business, and they're coming out and they're having these, what to a boomer or even Xers who would be like, well, you got to leave that stuff at home. That's weird. But that's just it's a different group, it's a different mindset. And if that's where they feel comfortable, and if you've established that as a comfortable place to have those conversations, then it's interesting that somebody would choose to do that in that setting.
Yeah. So here's the thing: we want people at work. We want whole people, and that doesn't mean like you come in every day and tell us like every bad thing. Like,
Right.
but we want you to show up and feel like you, and so that we can get the
Right.
full you at the table. And
Yep.
dude,
Don't put your OnlyFans in your email signature or anything like that. It's
right, right. We don't need your dating profile up there.
Yes, not necessary.
But in a serious note, this woman was extremely courageous,
Yeah.
and it was like a full circle moment for me to see all the work that the OTRG leaders did to create this space. Again, it's not forced upon everybody. I need to educate myself more about the transgender community, and I went there for that purpose. And I'll tell you what, like, there wasn't a person in there talking who can't relate to the pain of my family disowned me because of a choice that I didn't want to have to make, but was authentic to me. And I would take the easier road if it was available to me. And seeing the genuineness of that and the courage and how she took all the negativity that was around her, and somehow like a tree takes in like carbon and puts out like turn that into compassion for those same people. Like I don't care what political beliefs, religious beliefs you have. Like if you don't see a person there that you want to embrace and care about, like you're probably not a credit union person anyway. So those moments have as much impact as the logic, tapping into the brain with some of the science, but tapping into the heart with just letting people see people. I got an email when I did that fireside and was really vulnerable about my own experience with PTSD and some other elements that I needed support with, and trying to break down shame and stigma. One of our oldest team members in his 70s sent me a note to say how much it meant to him. And I was like, I had a stereotype of like, oh, older men are going to think I'm a bleeding heart and I'm breaking legs. Like, you never know.
He's a great generation. He's like, shut up, kid.
Yeah, people step forward, man. And I think that's power. You're not going to have everybody be on board, but the more you are what you are, the right people come to you and the wrong people walk away. And that's okay. People can find their other place. It's just, let's not try to say we're everything, because then we're nothing. Right.
Right. So you're basically just you're setting up places for people to feel that the DEIB, to feel like they belong, and that in and of itself is providing that diversity, the equity, and the inclusion. So you're none of it's required, and I mean, would that be a true statement? You're just you're facilitating conversation internally in your organization with groups of people that may be similar, may not be similar, but the idea is to encourage the non-similar folks to interact. And I mean, is that the desired outcome for the DEIB program?
Yeah, we have really deliberately stated goals and objectives, but in a broad brush, what you're talking about is we're creating a sense of belonging and inclusion where it might not systematically currently exist, and then getting those voices to help us create the conditions for it to exist in the future. So, and just for the OTRGs, for example, we only have 4. Are those the only 4 identities that people want to convene around and have unique? Of course not, but we probably can't support a lot more at once, as an example. Yep. But on the other hand,
so how do you address that? Like, have you had situations where somebody came to you and identified as X and you don't have the bandwidth to really support X? How do you handle those conversations?
We're in the process of that. Really, that's like a modern issue. So, for example, we'd love to have we've had people say, hey, what about veterans? Cool. I think what we're trying to figure out is, do all of these OTRGs exist in perpetuity? Do we kind of fold into the council, fold out of the council to help create the momentum in some of these identities, or not? How many can we push the limit to? How much can we put on OTRG leaders versus centrally like, we want to have that balance, right, as well. But one of the things that we are drawing a line on, which is kind of common, is I've heard it from people before where they'll say, well, what about, like, what if I'm, and it's usually secondhand. I don't know if it's because of fear of saying it themselves, but hey, how come there's not a white guy
Mm,
club?
right.
And like,
Yep.
one, make every OTRG totally open door. We don't want people to think it's exclusive. That's the whole opposite of
Right.
what we're trying to do. Show up,
Yep.
take part. We're all
Mhm.
people.
Yep.
You'll know people better you know yourself better by engaging with people with
Mhm.
like identity. But
Yep.
two, I'll tell you where the white guy club is. It's at the board table already. Like, we already have an OTRG. It's called Leadership and Finance. You know, I think we have to look at that head on as well.